Hi, everyone, and welcome to our next webinar in our environmental justice series hosted by the National Park Service Connected Conservation Community of Practice. My name is Cass Bismeyer, and I'm the lead for our C2 community, and we have been in the midst of an 8-part series focused on environmental justice in the interface of landscape scale conservation. If you're just joining us, we have been recording all of our webinars in this series. You can find them on our nps.gov/connected conservation website, as well as our internal toolkit. We do have 3 more webinars in this series, and you should be able to register for those very soon. And that information is also found on our website. Today, we're really excited to host NASA and their DEVELOP program on Earth observations for environmental justice. And I'm thrilled to introduce our 3 presenters today. We will conclude our session today with a Q&A session, so feel free throughout the presentation to drop any questions that you might have in the chat, and we'll get to those at the very end. So with that said, again, excited to introduce Lauren Childs-Gleason, DEVELOP Science Manager. Lauren began working with DEVELOP in 2006 at John C. Stenson Space Center, while a geography graduate student transitioned to Langley Research Center in 2009 to join the DEVELOP National Program Office. We also have Amanda Clayton, DEVELOP Science Lead. Amanda joined DEVELOP in 2015 at Goddard Space Flight Center upon receiving her master's degree in environmental science, and transitioned to Langley Research Center in 2016 to serve as a project coordination fellow and subsequently a senior fellow. And then we also have Marco Vallejos, DEVELOP Environmental Justice Fellow. Marco joined DEVELOP in the fall of 2020, participating virtually at Marshall Space Flight Center and later Langley Research Center. Again, we're just excited to have you all join us as a part of this series and to learn more about your program. With that said, Lauren, I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started.
Great, thank you, Cass. So yeah, we're really excited to talk about DEVELOP and the work we've been doing with environmental justice today. And so real briefly, kind of an overview of what we'll be talking through. I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction to kind of just NASA Earth Science as well as DEVELOP. Marco will kind of talk a little bit about environmental justice and the work that we've been doing at NASA DEVELOP. And then Amanda's going to give a few example projects of projects that we've done with the National Park Service and also environmental justice projects that we've done to kind of show you the type of work that we do. And so with that, I'll get going on the NASA Earth Science overview. But so I think we always like to kind of start with this. So when you think about NASA, what comes to your mind? And you can shout it out. We won't be able to hear you, but you know, kind of be, you know, what's in your mind? And so, you know, more often than not, people are thinking astronauts and rocket launches, moon landing, maybe Mars, different kinds of things that are out there in space, and not too often people really think about the Earth, like Earth observations, again, satellites that are actually looking back down at Earth. But really, that's actually a really large focus within NASA currently, and actually since its inception in the late 50s. And so kind of in support of this, the NASA Earth Science Division, which again is something, an organization that you know, not many people have necessarily heard about when they think about NASA. But NASA is putting out, has a whole fleet of satellites and instruments on the International Space Station as well that are studying the Earth and collecting all kinds of different information. And so we love to show this slide. It's our fleet, you know, slide that shows what's up there currently and then also what's planned for the future. And so for the blue, those are missions that have been up there in some cases since the late 90s, and they're still studying the Earth. We have some of our newest missions in green. Those are missions that have just been, you know, launched in the last year or so. And then we also have those that are coming up in the future. So those that we're kind of, you know, building and getting ready to launch into space. And those are in that kind of orange and yellow color. But this is to kind of just reiterate the fact that there are all kinds of different satellites and instruments up there that are studying the Earth. And so at the Earth Science Division within NASA, we use that kind of vantage point of space to really understand the Earth as a system and understand, you know, all the different kind of things that are happening in the inner workings. And we do this through kind of 5 lines of business. So there's the technology development that helps us implement that. So putting up those satellites and, you know, the different kind of instruments that are on them. We have the flight that's actually shooting them into space and getting them up there. We also have the research and analysis group that's doing a lot of basic research to understand, you know, the fundamentals of like what that kind of data is showing us. Also, we have the data side of the house. So we have these huge repositories of information the satellites and other instruments are collecting. And then there's the applications piece, which is really where you're taking that data and applying it for societal benefit. And so we fall within the application side. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Applied Sciences program. The Applied Sciences program is really trying to connect, users, people that could potentially use this data with the applications and the different kind of ways to use it. And so connecting that data and the users is really our focus. And we do that through 3 different kind of facets. There's the mission engagement, where parts of Applied Sciences are interacting with those folks that are creating the satellites and the different missions, and really trying to make sure that they take users' needs into account when they're developing kind of new missions. We also have thematic applications. So these are that you can see kind of listed there on the right. So that's the health and air quality, disasters, and so on. And so we organize different programs specifically on these different themes, and really kind of focus the research and activities and applications that are happening within these kind of thematic areas. And then there's also the capacity building program, which again is where we fall. So I'm going to speak to that a little bit more on the next slide. So the capacity building program really tries to connect individuals and institutions with Earth observations. And we do this by increasing both awareness, but also access to the data, and then showing how it can be applied. And so there are 3 programs, RSET, Develop, and Severe, that are working to do this. There's also the Indigenous Peoples Pilot Initiative, which is really trying to connect with the Indigenous communities and engage them in using satellite data. And then there's also the prizes and challenges element, which is looking at all kinds of creative ways of bringing in folks to work towards different kind of activities that use prizes and challenges as that mechanism. But we really work with any kind of user that could be from people that really have no idea that satellite data is even really a resource to them, to those that are really professional users and know how to use a lot of this data already. And we work internationally and domestically. So some of our activities, which I'll speak to on this next slide, have slightly different focuses. So the RSET program, which is the Applied Remote Sensing Training Program, they conduct webinars and trainings that are focused on building skills and sharing information from satellite data with a really broad set of an audience. Like they do these webinars each year and bring in tens of thousands of people. So it's really an interesting kind of opportunity to learn more. They generally build these webinars around different themes. So you can see kind of some there are listed, but these webinars are freely available. They're a great resource for anybody to join as they are created. And then also the whole archive of all trainings that they've ever created are available on the Applied Sciences website. So it's a really great resource to folks. Develop, I'll talk on the next slide a little bit, but Severe is also one of our sister programs. And it's a partnership between NASA and USAID, and it's building skills and capabilities in the developing world to use geospatial data. And so you can see in that little map there that they have hubs across the globe that work within different regions to really build capacity in those regions to use Earth observations and other kind of geospatial resources. And a little bit more about Develop. Develop is a dual capacity building program in that we bring in participants to work on our feasibility studies that are students, recent graduates, early career professionals, transitioning career professionals, really anybody that's 18 and over and wants to learn more about satellite observations and how they can be applied. And then on the flip side, we bring in partner organizations. So these are really that kind of engaged decision-making organizations. And we combine them together to work on these feasibility studies that apply the Earth observations. So that's why we like this kind of 3 E's: the empowered participants, the Earth observations, and the engaged decision makers. But this is all to build the workforce and build skills to use satellite data, build geospatial analysis skills in the workforce, as well as informed decisions. And we do this through 11 different locations. So we have 5 at NASA centers, and those are the ones you can see that are in the kind of royal blue color. 5 of them are at NASA centers, and then 6 are at regional locations, and those are in the kind of aqua. And traditionally, they were in-person activities, and then because of the pandemic, we've been running virtual since spring of 2020, although we are looking to actually start bringing back people on center starting this summer. But each of these locations conduct projects. And so a little bit more about the projects. We have 50 to 60 projects that are taking place a year. There's many different flavors, but at their kind of core, there's some shared characteristics that we'll just talk through here quickly. So, really the fundamental reason that we do these projects is to show how NASA Earth observations can be applied and like what the recipes are for using that data, like to inform decision making. We have, these are just feasibility studies, so they are conducted in 10 weeks, but the point is to really show how they can be used and be addressing these different kind of environmental issues and be applied to those. And the projects are co-developed with partner organizations, like I mentioned. So it's all really trying to identify how folks can benefit from using the satellite data and kind of enhancing their decision-making processes. Again, these are conducted in just 10 weeks, so these are short term, but we have a spring, summer, and fall term. And these projects are conducted by small teams that have diverse backgrounds. We are an interdisciplinary program, so there's no required background to apply to the program. And each of these projects create a consistent set of deliverables. So the teams are getting really great experience, writing about their work, really communicating their science, and showing kind of like the tools and things that they've created. And then also, these are not just done by random teams, like they are done under the guidance of NASA and partner science advisors that are really making sure there's merit to the methods and the different science that they do. And similar to the applied sciences, we work within not just the 7 application areas that they work within, but also urban development and energy. So we have 9 different thematic areas that we work within. And a little bit about project partners. We wanted to kind of give an illustration of the types of organizations that we're partnering with. So you can see here, this is the kind of donut pie chart from last summer. We have about a quarter from federal government. We have about a quarter from international groups, and then another quarter that are from like local and state government. And then there's also nonprofits and for-profits and academia and other kind of groups that are like woven in there. So there's really no group that we can't work with. We're very open to different organizations. We do make sure that every single project is tailored specifically to an end user organization. And so what I mean by that is an organization that is making some kind of environmental decision or taking some kind of action. So because we are applied sciences, that is really like a core kind of tenet to our work. And to close out this section, just wanted to highlight some of the benefits to the partners that we work with. So the ability to observe the Earth's surface and the different kind of changes over time is really big. Being able to use this as a kind of data, additional data point when they're making decisions is very helpful, especially when you take in consideration that the NASA data, some of it has, like I mentioned, have been up in space taking measurements for a really long time. Like we have 50 years of Landsat data, and so there's this really great kind of ability to monitor change, over time and understand how the kind of Earth is changing. The other thing is you can combine satellite data with in situ measurements and other kind of data points that you have to really give a very holistic understanding of the environment and of whatever kind of the environmental situation is that partners are looking at. And the data really blends itself well to cool visualizations. And so these different ways that you can look at it, whether it be mapping or creating data plots and heat maps and all these different kinds of things, can be really great tools in communicating why some kind of change or policy or decision needs to be made. So they can be a really kind of great resource to different organizations using them. And a really great benefit is, again, all the Earth observation data are free. They're an open resource to really the whole world. And so we're just trying to increase the awareness and access to this data so that folks can use it. So with that, I will turn it over to Marco to talk a little bit more about Develop's work within environmental justice. So all you, Marco.
Thanks, Lauren. Hi, everyone. Good to be here today. And so we'll be speaking about environmental justice at Develop and why a group like NASA capacity building is involved in environmental justice. And so this slide really is here to show that we are working to address these executive orders of EO, executive orders that have been in place to address what we're doing and to serve underserved communities, whether that is in their economic, social, and civic life, and think about them in regard to their environmental lived realities, and to make sure that we as a program can address these problems and then also support their decision-making practices. And those environmental injustices may be related to the climate crisis, whether that is domestically or internationally, as well as making sure that we have representation in this, whether as participants or our partners involved, and that addresses the Executive Order 14035. So Lauren, next slide, please. And so we wanted to center the definitions that we use to look at environmental justice. One of them comes from the father of environmental justice, Dr. Bullard, a sociologist and activist. And so whether by conscious design or institutional neglect, communities of color in urban ghettos, in rural poverty pockets, or on economically impoverished Native American reservations face some of the worst environmental devastation in the nation. And really here, what we're trying to look at is that we want to make sure that we can see environmental justice and align ourselves to other groups that have been working in this field much longer than we have as a program. And so in that way, we also center the EPA definition of environmental justice that many of you probably work under and use as a guiding principle, which involves the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people in this type of work, especially in relation to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And so following this, it's not only an injustice that marginalized communities bear the disproportionate shame of these negative environmental consequences, but we also want to make sure that we provide a pathway to justice that centers those people and involves those people in those decision-making processes as seen on the screen. Next slide. And so then this work is pivotal to what Develop does, as we are a capacity building program and as it makes sense for us to be using Earth observations as well as socioeconomic data for the support of decision making. That is what our program is centered around. And then so now with a stronger focus in environmental justice, we're also seeing how we can include those communities more and provide those communities with information, whether that is from Earth observations or the connection made between Earth observations and socioeconomic data to support their decision-making processes, and as well as hopefully lead them to be able to take action. In that way, we have often focused on extreme heat and the urban heat island effect, urban tree canopy coverage, as well as urban flooding and landslide risk, as those environmental observations tend to be the most accessible and simplest way to connect to socioeconomic data. That has allowed us to partner with a variety of organizations, as Lauren mentioned, whether they're federal or local, as well as nonprofit. Two partners to highlight that we tend to do a lot of work with historically has been Groundwork USA, both as a national program as well as their local branches, as well as AGU's Thriving Earth Exchange, and then also local city governments or city departments. Next slide. And part of what we're also looking at with environmental justice is to establish a new type of project. Normally we do feasibility projects that are those 10-week projects that take a look at Earth observations that are available and data that is available, apply them to in the aid of decision making. But rather we wanted to make sure that we enter this work sustainably and with care towards the involvement of these different groups. And so we now are conducting 2 needs assessment projects and will likely conduct future needs assessment projects. And those projects are under my purview as the Environmental Justice Fellow. And one of those projects focuses on disasters, looking at the frequency and severity of disasters and how those disasters disproportionately impact marginalized communities for a variety of reasons. And then similarly, health and air quality, and looking at the same aspect of marginalized communities tend to bear the brunt of poor health and air quality for a variety of reasons. And so with that, we're conducting a needs assessment project that looks at 3 facets, starting with landscape analysis. So looking at what environmental justice work has been done in the past in these sectors or in these spheres of research, And then ideally identifying active organizations working in this space. And the teams have typically divided the organizations between environmental justice organizations who know about geographic information systems or sciences and want to use them or have used them in the past, environmental justice organizations that want to build their capacity and learn more about it to aid in their work, as well as groups who maybe are doing this work but have not come across the environmental justice movement as a formal movement. And so then with that, we conduct a listening tour where we speak to these groups in a variety of ways and ideally are able to gather what they need from us or potentially need just in general, whether that is information on RSET trainings or on other programs involved, whether that's funding, or ideally creating a developed project with ourselves or with other NASA applied sciences groups. And so one thing to note is that in the pursuit of equitable environmental justice, we also make sure that we give the transcripts of these conversations and show these groups what we've gathered from our conversations with them, and share that with them before we do anything with that information. That way they have that equitable creation in this way and feel like an actual project partner rather than just someone that we're trying to work with and get something out of from. And so then in that way, after all this has been done, we're now conducting synthesis reports to find key takeaways following that equity and environmental justice, where and how can develop contribute in this sphere, and what can we add, particularly as these groups have been doing this work for quite some time. We want to make sure that we are not distracting or taking away from their work, but rather that we are adding by the use of our skills in geospatial analysis. And then ideally, this leads to long-lasting partnerships and project ideas that we at Develop can pursue or that applied sciences can pursue in a variety of ways. And I believe that is all I have to say today.
Great. Thanks, Marco and Lauren. I wanted to take the rest of our time and talk a little bit about some project examples so you can really kind of get a better idea about what a developed project looks like. So since about, I guess, we started a large engagement with the National Park Service back in 2016 for the centennial year. We've had some projects before then, but I would say 2016 was really when our kind of partnership blossomed. And since then, we've done about 65 different projects with the National Park Service. It's a really great fit for the Develop program because the scale of a park or a city is really kind of the perfect scale for Develop and for us to use Earth observations data. As Lauren mentioned, we do about 50 to 60 feasibility projects a year, which gives us a lot of opportunities to engage with different park units all across the country. A lot of our work has focused on park units within the Intermountain West, but we have done work all over the country. On this slide is just a couple of just general topics that we have looked at and used satellite observations to address. So things like vegetation and landscape scale disturbances, invasive species modeling. I have a project example I'll talk a little bit about coming up that speaks on that. We've done water quality and air quality, looking at precipitation patterns and snowpack, a lot of projects around wildfire and vegetation recovery, monitoring cultural resources, and also modeling light pollution. And so we actually, Lauren mentioned, we have some active projects partnering with the Park Service right now in our spring term. And then we have a few more that will happen over the summer. So we're really excited to continue that engagement and be able to work with Park Service units all across the country. And related to that, Develop has also worked with Groundwork USA, as Marco mentioned, on 11 projects that looked at urban heat, flooding, tree canopy, and landslides. If you aren't familiar with Groundwork USA, it's the only network of local organizations devoted to transforming the natural and built environment of low resource communities. So it's a national enterprise made up of local trusts, and they work at the intersection of the environment, equity, and civic engagement. And so kind of the main federal partners of Groundwork USA are the National Park Service and the Environmental Protection Agency. So it's been a really great opportunity to work with them as well. So I'm going to start by talking very briefly about two projects that are kind of more traditional Park Service projects, examples that we've done, and then a focus a little bit more on two projects with Groundwork USA that touch a little bit more on the environmental justice focus. So this first project was a project that we did out in Colorado and Nevada, looking at bare ground and habitat suitability for an invasive species, primarily medusa head and fountain grass. And so I think a lot of us are aware that the spread of invasive species put native vegetation at risk and subsequent landscapes, habitats, and those sorts of things. They can impact local economies and in some cases affect human health as well. So for this particular project, the develop team partnered with the National Park Service and also the USGS to assist in combating the ecological challenge of these invasive species. So they derived bare ground indices using Earth observations to kind of figure out what was the best indicator to be able to use in their habitat suitability mapping. And so with kind of enhanced models and predictions of where these habitats of invasive species are currently and where they can exist in the future is going to be helpful for more targeted management strategies in general. And so most of the land that they looked at is publicly owned by the Bureau of Land Management. The area sits east of the Sierra Nevada, so it has a rain shadow effect. There are low levels of precipitation, and it's in a high desert, so there can be some extreme temperature changes. And so the goal was, again, to look at habitat suitability, kind of present day, and also for our ecological forecasting projects, a component of that is looking how a certain environmental variable or condition might look in the future for kind of future planning and geographic distributions of these species. You can go to the next slide, please. So the team really started out by kind of testing different vegetation indices, or bare ground indices in this case. So Lauren mentioned that these are feasibility projects. So a lot of times it is, kind of a test bed for our teams to look at different methods, try some things out, and kind of weigh their options to determine what would be best for a particular problem. So this is just a very high level example of that. I think previously looking at these invasive species and bare ground, they were looking at satellite data from a sensor called MODIS, which is at a 250 meter spatial resolution. So it is a little bit of a coarse measurement. So they were looking to see if other ground indices from satellite data that was a little bit sharper, looked at a smaller area, could be a bit more beneficial in detecting the invasive species and looking at habitat distribution. So this slide just shows a couple of high-level snapshots of what those different indices look like and how they're able to detect vegetation and bare ground. You go to the next slide. Again, this is just a small area from the study looking at habitat suitability specifically for the medusa head invasive species. So on the left was the habitat suitability map when the project was completed, so back in 2018. You can see there are a couple of patches of high presence or probability of medusa grass, but for the most part, it doesn't look like too much of a problem at a cursory glance. And then the team used some projected climate data from NASA to kind of determine what habitat suitability for medusa head could look like in 2015. And you can see if it could be drastically expanding. So the probability of invasive species spread is quite significant. So that's just an example of one project that was looking at ecological forecasting. If you go to the next, this is kind of going the opposite direction, going all the way to the East Coast and looking more at, kind of water-related issues. So this was a project that was a little bit more recent at the Assateague Island National Seashore. And so north of Assateague Island, there was the construction of an Ocean City inlet jetty system, and this really disrupted the natural process of sediment transport along the Assateague Island shoreline, which of course can threaten things like habitat, just geological integrity. And I think, as we know, with sea level rise, shoreline change is really important to be able to monitor and map. So the develop team was able to use satellite imagery from the Landsat satellite, and also Sentinel-2, which is a satellite from the European Space Agency, to map historical changes of nearshore suspended sediment in land cover. This was also a forecasting project, so they looked to forecast land cover change in the future based on, some historically observed patterns. So this project worked locally with the Park Service and also worked with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who works on a lot of these kind of shoreline and sand deposition projects to, really better inform decisions regarding their sediment restoration on the island. And so kind of what the team did was looking at sediment transport and also land cover change. So if you go to the next slide, this is just one example of how they were able to look at sediment transport. So they were looking specifically at turbidity and also different properties of ocean color. So assuming that during these kind of sand deposits and sediment transport, that the water would be more turbid than not. So this particular project is looking at a specific sediment bypass event that happened in January of 2021. So just, high level on the left figure, it shows pretty low levels of turbidity until the event happened, around January 25th, where there was a large change in the turbidity of the water. And so there have been historic beach nourishment events, dredging, sediment bypassing, all those sorts of things. So it has been really helpful for the Park Service and Army Corps of Engineers to be able to, kind of see the conditions before as well as monitor afterwards to see if those interventions are really being effective or not. And then the last slide is just looking at land cover change, which was the second aspect of this project. So they were kind of mostly looking at, overall net changes over time between 2006 and 2018. So open water and barren land were areas that lost land cover, whereas unconsolidated shore, grassland developed. Some of those areas actually gained area of land cover over that time. So those are just some of the kind of more traditional Park Service projects that we participate and work on and develop. And so the next two projects I want to talk about are a little bit more specific to the environmental justice application. So looking at Earth observations data and then also incorporating different socioeconomic data to really be able to identify, populations that are most at risk to certain things. And I think as Marco mentioned, a lot of our projects focus on a couple of specific topics, one being urban heat. That is probably our most common project that we have done that has touched environmental justice. And this project was one that occurred in Yonkers, New York. So it worked with the Groundwork USA Trust Hudson Valley. And so these projects, I guess these two, were actually projects that were conducted over 2 project terms. So instead of just one 10-week session that Lauren mentioned, they spanned across 2 10-week sessions. So it gives the teams a little bit more time to dive deep into the topic. Both of these projects use a pretty sophisticated modeling platform called Invest. So it's been helpful for the teams to have a little bit more time to tease those out, but they've been able to do a lot of really great work. So this project, specifically in Yonkers, used Earth observations to model the cooling capacity of trees canopies and their contribution to thermal comfort. So the first part of this project really looked at identifying areas of extreme heat. And then this project looked more about, potential interventions and what that could look like. So they provided data to support prioritization of efforts for sustainable and equitable distribution of green infrastructure. And also these projects that have worked with Groundwork USA have a large component of, having end products that can be used in the community. Groundwork has really, told us how valuable and important being able to, go around to the community and really show, images and maps to get their point across and better communicate the science to the general public. And so this project aimed to help Groundwork and also just general city planners in Yonkers to look at these kind of urban cooling interventions, and also support an initiative that Groundwork USA has called Climate Safe Neighborhoods, and New York State's Climate Smart Communities program as well. And the main kind of Earth observations pieces that the team used were looking at land surface temperature. And for this in particular, they looked at both daytime and nighttime surface temperature, which can be indicative of, the kind of, actual temperatures that folks are feeling, in their homes, out and about. If you move to the next slide, this focuses a little bit more on the kind of socioeconomic data that I had mentioned, because that is, a big focus of these projects, of course. And so they used a, guidance from the New York State Department of Health. They have a set of components for heat vulnerability, which you'll see here. They include factors like socioeconomic, language, elderly and elderly isolation, and also environmental factors. And they're all combined to have a measurement of heat vulnerability. They also used some data from the American Community Survey, a little bit more kind of demographic data. They used data from the National Land Cover Database, things like high building intensity areas, open undeveloped land, along with that land surface temperature data as well. So if you move on to the next slide, this is just one map, that is showing kind of the culmination of combining the satellite data and all of the different socio-demographic data. So this is the summation of all of those different variables to come up with the heat vulnerability based on census tracts in Yonkers. And so it's really, the point of this is to indicate how vulnerable certain areas are in the city to heat events compared to others around them. And so areas that are light indicates that it's one of the least vulnerable areas, whereas areas that are in the darker red are the most heat related or heat vulnerable areas in Yonkers. So you can see that areas to the, south and west, there's a higher concentration of more vulnerable areas or census tracts. And then kind of the last bit of this project is looking at thermal comfort and those interventions. So, how can changes in the built environment affect people and the heat that they're experiencing? So the intervention here was to increase street canopy cover, and they were looking at what would happen if they placed more trees at different areas of point heat sources. They specifically looked at an intervention that would include planting European redwood, which is on New York City's approved street tree list. So really indicative of, an actual intervention that could happen. The map on the left is showing the modeled conditions that were existing, and then the model was able to see what those temperatures would look like if this intervention did occur. And you can see the numbers are, about 10 degrees different. I think I would take 101 degrees versus 110 any day. And this is just one area of the city that they looked at. And then the last project is one of our projects that is a little different. So instead of focusing on heat, which actually this project did first, the second half of it is assessing flooding and landslide susceptibility along the Ohio-Kentucky border, kind of near Cincinnati, Ohio, and Covington, Kentucky. And we found that doing flood-related projects in cities can really be a challenge using Earth observations for a lot of various factors, mostly having to do with the kind of fleeting nature of flooding. It usually doesn't stick around too much, and also just the effects of large buildings on satellite data. But these are both Cincinnati, Ohio, and Covington, Kentucky are densely populated environments. They're very vulnerable to flooding and landslides. And so the team used different satellite observations and also combining that with ancillary data to create a landslide susceptibility and also exposure maps. And before they did this, they mapped rainfall runoff and also runoff retention, again, using one of these models from INVEST, which is the Integrated Valuation of Ecosystem Services. So the previous project used the urban cooling module, and this project used the urban flood risk mitigation model. So it's been a really great resource for our projects and local communities. And the team created reproducible maps looking at flooding and landslides. And so the first thing that they looked at, as I mentioned, was the modeled runoff. And so they used different inputs from satellite data for precipitation, along with other things to identify areas that had the greatest risk of flood and then associated damage cost as well. So they calculated potential storm runoff, runoff retention, and then also service values of affected infrastructure within the study area. So that is on the left. And then on the right, they looked at landslide susceptibility as well. So the areas of red show areas of high landslide susceptibility, and this is purely from environmental factors. So if you go to the next slide, similar to the project in Yonkers, they took the kind of environmental components derived from satellite data and combined it with socioeconomic data to identify areas and populations of risk. So they ended up creating landslide exposure maps, looking again at that biologically derived landslide susceptibility, combining it with socioeconomic and population factors to come up with an overall landslide susceptibility. So the three socioeconomic and population factors they used were poverty, the population of elderly residents, and then the population of African-American residents as well. Also looking at this is at the census block group level. And so the final slide here is just showing the combined landslide exposure map, again, combining the landslide susceptibility with the different socio-demographic factors. So they were able to produce a uniform map that focused on general exposure of the area. And so landslide susceptibility was used in relation to vulnerability to create the exposure map. We call this a bivariate map, so it maps, two factors at once. So on the map, you'll see the kind of darkest blue are areas that have high levels of landslide susceptibility and vulnerable populations. So this is a really, really great way to be able to map the intersections between environmental risk and also demographic data as well. And I think that was my last kind of project example slide. So hopefully that gave you a good idea of the projects that we do. And again, we do so many a year. They are really variable. So I think there are very few kind of thematic topics or subject matter that aren't a good fit for develop and using Earth observations in some way, which is really exciting. But if you are interested in more about the types of projects that Develop does, we do have a project archive on our website where you can learn more about these projects as well as all the other projects we've done in recent years. It shows information about kind of the thematic focus area, has a summary of the project, the partners, Earth observations used, etc. And then the last thing here is that we are always collecting project ideas. I mentioned that we have recently been doing a lot with the Park Service again over the past year, and that has come from a call that we put out through our contacts within the Intermountain region of projects. So we are currently collecting ideas for our spring 2023 term, which will start around the end of January 2023, and also our summer term, which starts in August. So if you are interested in participating in a project with Develop, we would love to hear from you. We do have a project request form on our website, which is a great way to kind of frame your issue and how it could be a good fit for a Develop project. And I know we also have our emails as well at the end of this presentation. So we work with all sorts of different partners, as Lauren mentioned, folks from the Park Service, federal agencies, local governments, nonprofits as well. So we are happy to be able to work with partner organizations that could benefit from satellite data. I think as our next, I think that is the bulk of our presentation that we have today. I think we will turn it back over to Cass for questions.
That was really inspiring. Thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing so many details about existing projects and how this is applied to not only parks, but elsewhere too. And Lauren and Marco, thank you for great overviews as well. Folks, at this time, we'll open it up to any questions. And to get started, and I know it looks like some people are typing in some questions right now. I'm just curious, it seems like you guys are coming upon your 25th anniversary here sometime soon. What's on the horizon? Anything big and exciting that we should be watching for, or that we could support somehow within your programming?
A great question. Yeah, so the 25th anniversary is next year. And I think we started a lot of the conversations of like, how can we highlight that? I think when we had our 20th anniversary, we did a lot of focus on the different partner organizations that we'd worked with. And I think we'll definitely want to do something like that. But I think the environmental justice projects, we're definitely trying to increase the numbers of those. Yeah, what am I forgetting, Amanda?
I don't know, I can't think of anything else. We tend to have, you know, we do, again, a lot of projects each year, and we do have, you know, times where we have different focuses. So when we did, you know, our first large concentration of Park Service projects back in 2016, 2017, that was really great because it's able, you know, we can show the impacts of the individual projects, but to be able to kind of present kind of a suite of projects that are all kind of around the same theme or focus is really exciting. So I think environmental justice, as Lauren mentioned, is a huge thing. We recently had a particular set of projects focused on the country of Bhutan. So I think it's always changing for us. So I think we're still planning.
Great. And a couple comments, just everyone saying that these are visually really incredible and people are checking out your website, lots of super content. Things you're presenting today. One question here, for the socioeconomic data, do you use EJ Screen or aggregate other data sets for those factors?
I would say up until this point, we haven't had any projects working directly with EJ Screen. And I think as a program, it's kind of a resource that's relatively new to us. We've had a lot of conversations over the past, I don't know, probably about 6 months or so with the EPA and Park Service. And so I think we're just kind of learning about all the different resources that are out there. Till this point, you know, a lot of our data comes from the census, from the American Community Survey. We also at NASA have a socioeconomic data center called the CDAC, where we get a lot of our socioeconomic data from as well. So we haven't had any projects yet use the EJ Screen tool, but it's definitely on our radar.
And for those of you who missed our last webinar that took place last week, we actually featured Ty with EPA and EJ Screen, and he gave us kind of a download of what exists now and what's coming. So if you haven't been in the EJ Screen website and checked out the incredible opportunities there, it really is very extensive. And we did record that webinar, and he does a demo of how to use that site. So if folks are interested in learning about that, you can just hop on our website and see that recording as well. Can you provide an example of an environmental justice project you've conducted that involves monitoring cultural resources?
I think, so we have done some cultural resource monitoring, but I don't think it was actually like something that we would have classified as environmental justice at the time. Although maybe if we like look back at it, like, I mean, we just weren't using the term, I guess, back then. So I think in that kind of 2016, 2017 realm, Amanda, I don't know if you remember any more specifics, but we did have, I think, one or two that were focusing on some different National Park Service and their cultural resources.
Yeah, I think we had maybe, I feel like they were in kind of the American Southwest. We had a Chaco Canyon project, I think, and a couple of others. But yeah, nothing at the time. We didn't look at any kind of socioeconomic or kind of the human dimension of those projects at the time. Something we should look out to do, though.
Yeah,
really,
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's an intersection that we're really interested in. If anybody out there has like an idea that kind of blends that, you know, National Park Service, maybe the communities that are around the parks or something with the environmental justice piece, like we're really interested in those kind of ideas. So please reach out.
Great, that's good to know. We'll definitely reach within our networks of those of us who are on today. Another question here about the data center you just mentioned. Is that something that people can access and use data that's available in there as well? And if so, are there trainings on how to use that, or can you point us the direction of where to access it?
Yeah, so I just flipped to this side because this just has some of the resources. So the CDAC, I guess the 4th one down, that's their link. And so there are all kinds of different resources. NASA has a bunch of different DACs, like the data centers, but this one's a little bit more unique because the socioeconomic piece is just not something that's like as prevalent across the rest of NASA. So this one has a lot of really unique holdings relating to population and different kind of vulnerabilities and things like that. So I don't know too much about what kind of training resources they might have on their site. I think there are some kind of like how-to guides and things for like accessing the different things there. But I believe that the RSIT program also did have a kind of joint training with them that has touched on some of the socioeconomic data centers data sets like within some of their other trainings. So I think that's kind of something we could, if you were to reach out to us, like we could probably help point you to some specifics depending on what kind of thematic interest you have. But yeah, it's a really interesting data repository, and so definitely look into it. Especially, I don't know that many people on the call might be doing like international work, but for like, you know, outside the US, when you don't have like the census data to use, like the CDAC has some really helpful data sites for that, or data sets for that.
Great, thank you so much. And we'll make sure that these links are available for folks as well alongside the recording. That's all the questions we have in the queue for right now. Any closing comments from any of you? And again, thank you so much for making the time to chat with us about your program.
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you for everybody that's kind of tuned in. These are some great resources to maybe visit. So NASA has just kind of created a really high level overview of the different kind of equity and environmental justice work that it's pursuing. So that's that first link. There's also an EJ backgrounder. So the data folks within NASA, they've been building some knowledge about the different kind of data sets that are applicable, as well as some of the project kind of examples. So that's there. And that second to last bullet, the data pathfinders, that's a really great way to kind of get involved and understand what the different data sets are that might be applicable to whatever topic you have at hand. So there's those are thematically focused again. And then they're also in the works building one for environmental justice. So I don't know exactly when that'll be coming out, but it is something looking forward that will be another kind of resource. And that ESDS program, like that's all the broad NASA data. So like, you know, if you are interested in learning more, not only through the earthdata.nasa.gov can you access the data, but there are all kinds of recipes for accessing data, and like kind of those data pathfinders help you point to like which data sets might be applicable to your interests. And then our website's also a huge kind of resource of just different kind of project examples. We're actually going to be migrating websites soon, but this link will continue to work for the foreseeable future. And then also the applied sciences site, which is the third bullet. I think that's another one that can be of interest. That's kind of like the bigger than us next level up, and there's all kinds of different activities. Some of them are related to environmental justice. For instance, the health and air quality program, they have like a HACAST, it's the health and air quality science team, and they have a TIGER team that's looking at various environmental justice activities relating to health and air quality. And then there's other kind of different activities that might be of interest there too. So I think that's just like another kind of great resource. But yeah, no, thank you. I don't know, Amanda or Marco, if you want to throw in any comments. And I'll flip back to our emails.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you again on behalf of the National Park Service and our connected conservation community. It's been great having you as a part of this ongoing environmental justice series. Folks, if you're still on, we do have a few more webinars in this series that are coming up. One will be featuring landscape scale conservation collaboratives who have recently stood up environmental justice committees within their collaborations. We'll also have a precursor to a forthcoming Department of the Interior Environmental Justice Symposium, and that'll include a series of panelists that'll be a moderated session where you can hear from some of the presenters who will be a part of that DOI symposium. And then I think a feature on Groundwork USA. So a little bit more about some of the work you guys touched on today. And we're just really thrilled to be hosting this series. So much to interact with, you know, between all of the webinars. There's obvious connections, and we're grateful to be able to help make some of those connections too. So thanks again, folks, and we'll post the recording to this webinar on our website here later today. Thanks, Lauren, Amanda, and Marco.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.